I tried not to get photos from that. I tried to I tried to find different slides here and there. I'm not a photographer, so none of these are mine. Some are taken off Google images. Some are from Jeff or Will Cook and so forth. So just to let you know that. So anyway, I think we go to the next first slide here. And so pardon the language on some of these, but, just to make it cutesy here. We're getting about time to start seeing the first skippers. And often the first skipper, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
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 Okay, because I'm leaning back a little bit. It helps my my hernia situation. I'm leaning back. Okay, so often the first skipper you might see is the one on the left, and that's a juvenile's dusky wing, and that's a male. You can, of course, see I got a male, and I tried to get the most typical examples I could find. That was a good thing about just calling up Google images and then, seeing a lot of photos there. And let's just kind of click and get the best, most normal one. So juvenile's dusky wing is quite a common butterfly. They have one brood in the spring, usually about March into May, or go in the mountains into June. But that's a fairly large dusky wing. Most everybody should be familiar with juvenile's dusky wings. Maybe the coastal parts are not as familiar, but in the mountains and a lot of Piedmont, they're quite common. And the thing about the males is you'll see all this gray or silvery kind of scaling out here. Now, most of the dusky wings, compared to the cloudy wings, which I'll talk about later, the dusky wings are kind of blotchy. You can see all the blotchiness here. Black. They're kind of dark brown with a black blotching, some white, these spots, dots here. But anyway, the juvenile's dusky wing is fairly large, and hold my fingers apart. It's about a spread wing and maybe 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches maybe. But always, you'll see it in addition to call this the wrist patch. You'll see on these dusky wings, we kind of collectively, this little area right in here, okay, in between these spots is kind of unofficially a wrist patch. The horse's dusky wing is several brooded. There is a small spring brood, but mostly it's summer and the fall. So you'll start seeing a lot more of these around May and into the fall. The juveniles pretty much stick to the woods, the hardwoods or the edges. They don't come into the gardens. And they're done by May and into June in the mountains. The horses will come into gardens. And this is the familiar dusky wing. In fact, it's the most likely dusky wing you'll see starting about May or June into October. So the male horses lacks pretty much all that silvery scaling out here. This one actually is not real fresh, but anyway, it's got the spots here. The wrist patch is a little paler than the other part here, brown, but there's a spot here on the inside of the wrist and the spots here. So this is the common one in the spring, and then this one is more in the summer and the fall, but occasionally they can fly together in, let's say, May. But again, the horses the male does not have that silvery scaling. So this one, most of you, Dave and Marty might start seeing that tomorrow. Never know, but they'll come out pretty early. Okay, next slide. Okay, now here are the females of these two, and they are tough. They can be very tough from above, but you see the females of these two, and again, these are the two largest dusky wings. The juveniles, they're both very blotchy, as you can see, a lot blotchier, a lot more buff on them than the males, okay? And also the spots here on the wings are a lot larger. Let's see all these spots here. So how do you tell the difference in these two? Well, it's a little tough from above, and I'll talk why I'm saying above. The horse's female, again, is more likely to be seen in gardens or, May and June onward. It's tend to be a little more contrasty in here. You see number one. strong black patches. It's a little more contrasty than on the female juveniles here. A little bit more contrasty, but otherwise they're pretty similar. And if someone were to send me a photograph of a female dusky wing, one of these guys, and I didn't know any more about the date or anything like that, I would probably have some trouble. Okay. So they are kind of tricky. Again, this is the one, you see number 2. It's more likely March into May, and they tend to be in the woods. They don't normally come into gardens and edges, yards, and stuff like that. And the horses, again, spring to fall, but mainly from June onward. Okay, Dave, the next one.
So did you see the comment that I think Al Hooks asked if there was a way to give Harry control so we can see what he's pointing to other than the arrows he has?
No, I'm just kind of waving it around. Sorry, that's not the. Can you see? Does the black arrow show here on that screen?
No.
You don't see that.
I see a yellow arrow.
We got the yellow arrows, Harry, but anything you're doing on your screen, we cannot see.
Okay, well, don't worry about it. I'm just messing around.
Okay.
But anyway, okay, the underside view, this is how you can tell for sure, or pretty much for sure on these things here. Males and females of the juvenile tend to have 2 large pale spots on the upper part of the hind wing. A lot of times these dusky wings are not readily seen from below, but sometimes if you do see them from below, you can see those 2 where the arrow in number 1 is pointing to. Ours is almost all, and most all the other 6 or 7 dusky wings lack that. Okay, and that holds for the females as well. Okay, so Jeff took these photos. That's why they're classic, perfect ones, as you can see. But anyway, so that's the main way to tell these. Again, juveniles is the one you're likely to start seeing pretty soon into May. So if you can see the underside, that's pretty distinctive. Okay, Dave, next one. Okay, now a couple more of the spring ones. These are spring only. These both the sleepy dusky wing and the dreamy dusky wing have a single brood. The sleepy comes out a little bit earlier. They'll come out in March, and they fly scattered throughout the Carolinas, more the mountains to the sand hills, harder toward the coast. Okay, that's the sleepy, and I'll go over the marks in a minute. The dreamy dusky wing is single brooded. It's more of a mountain species, and it's more like April into June. So it's a couple weeks later, but they often will overlap. Okay, so in the mountains, you could see both on the same trip. All these dusky wings you see them a lot on dirt. Like you find a gravel road or a dirt road somewhere, that's a good place to look for these things. So they will nectar some, but tend to see the dusky wings, especially spread open. You can see these on a rock and on sand, just kind of warming up in the spring. Okay, so that's the situation with that. Now, on what you look for, because these can be tricky. I have trouble with them sometimes. Okay, one on the sleepy, the number 1 has a black chain. You see that kind of curved out there, just outside the wrist area there. Those black circles that are kind of connected. The field guides call that the chain. Okay, and it's fairly distinctive on the male. And on the dreamy, you see it's blurrier. It's not as obvious. Okay, and I should mention size too. Dreamies are the dreamies are the smallest dusky wings. Okay, I'm holding my fingers apart, and they're about barely an inch spread across. The sleepy is more of an inch and a half, more like a juvenile's. Sleepies and the dreamies can fly with the juveniles in the mountains and that sort of thing in the spring. But the dreamy, you can often tell them in flight before they settle down. You know, they're barely the size when you're flying about your thumbnail, you know, until, you know, spread the wing. But that's very small. Two, on dreamy, if you look at the wrist patches, they both have that silver. Well, first of all, both of these are unspotted. Okay. I didn't even put that up there. It's the top, other than the top two unspotted. You can see you don't have the little white spots up there. Okay. Up on that, you know, the forewing there. So you get a dusky wing that lacks those spots. It's going to be one of these two. Now, on the dreamy on the right, that wrist patch is generally the brightest thing you see. It's brighter, more intense than outside the chain. And on the sleepy, on the male, it's about the same. The wrist patch doesn't stand out as much as it does on the dreamy. And if you've got a light background, you can see that the sleepy dusky wing, the palps area at the front of the face there, you don't notice them. Whereas on a dreamy, they are quite like two prongs sitting there. A lot of times, again, if they're on dark leaves or something, you can't see that very well. So sometimes you usually have to go elsewhere on that. Okay. Our next slide, Dave. Okay. Now here are the females, again, of these same two species. Again, there's no white spotting there. Okay. So if you got a dusky wing, again, dusky wings are real blotchy as compared to the cloudy wings. You shouldn't be confusing those two groups. I'll get to the cloudy wings in a moment. But the sleepy, the female is quite different from the male. The male is gray, dark gray to blackish. The female is brown and buffy. And it has that light wrist. Again, both these, the female lacks the white silvery scaling anywhere too. Got the distinct black chain, okay, like the male has. And the wrist area, number 3 that I point to, that left arrow, they tend to be very buffy, all right? Whereas on the dreamy female is very similar to the male. And the reason I'm pretty sure that's the female is a swollen abdomen there. Females of all these butterflies, if you have photos where the hind wings aren't covering up the abdomen so much, the females are wider in the middle, okay? So the males on all these butterflies tend to have more of a straight-sided abdomen or tapering. But anyway, the female dreamy on the right looks very similar to the male, but it's still very silvered wrist area that's brighter than anything else. And the sleepy, again, is more of the buffy color. Okay, next one. I've got a lot of dusky wings since there can be very confusing, and there's a lot more to go here. So, and again, they're always going to have at least 2 species on the same screen. So anyway, okay, now as you get into the summer and into the fall, you have real problems. Okay, Zircco comes into play. Now, the Zircco dusky wing is more of a coastal plain species. It does get into the Piedmont, but it's more of coastal plain. It likes sandy soil, but Horace's does too. I know when Jeff and I and others go to our Sandhills game land, both of them can be right together on the same dirt road, side by side. And then they get kind of tricky. I know some of you were on the Carolina Butterfly Society trip to the Sandhills game land in early June last year. And I think we had these guys side by side. How do you tell them apart? Okay. On the Horaces, again, I think I may have taken, this might be the same photo as the one you saw a couple slides ago. The Horaces has a distinct spot inside the wrist, that number 1 area, okay? And the Zircco fresh one normally does not. Now, here's the catch. You probably, if you squint closely, you probably can see a hint of that little spot there. This is always tricky because all these butterflies, when they're fresh, they tend to have darker scales, brown scales, and then over time, after a few days or week or so, those scales can wear off. And so you might start seeing a little spot there on the Zirrucco. And that's true with so many butterflies, especially these summer and fall on the coast, these broad-winged and Aaron skippers and all that sort of thing. It can be tricky depending on the amount of wear. But Zirrucco, this is a male, is very dark brown. It's almost, when they're fresh, you can hardly see any black blotching at all. You see number 3 there on the Zirrucco. They're very dark. And horses tend to be a little bit blotchier. And the other thing is that I'll always look for on a horse's, the wrist area, number 2, is about the same color or slightly paler than the rest of the forewing. I mean, there's not much difference. Zirrucco, male and female, always has a paler wrist area. In the male, it's more of rust. You see, it's kind of a rustier color. It's definitely different from the rest of that forewing. Okay, so Zirruccos tend to be a little bit pointier wing, but that's very tricky. They're about the same size. And when they're flying around, getting ready to land, you can't tell them apart. And then when they land, they can still be very tricky because sometimes you might see a faint spot on the Zirrucco at number 1, or the harshes are real fresh, and it might be hard to see that other thing. But anyway, Zirrucco, the wrist patch is always different color, paler than on the horses. Okay, next one. Next slide. Okay. Now,
sure.
They're not all going to be easy. So it's like, okay, not everything is a male, as you all know. It's 50-50. A lot of times females are not as easy to see because they're hiding more in the grass. But anyway, you get these guys. And this is the good thing about taking photographs. You can study them later, and if you don't take photographs, you're like me, I have my iPhone, but, and you see it, and then you have to make a quick judgment there, like, oh, geez, what was that? So anyway, okay. So these 2 species, the wild indigo now, has multiple broods. It's scarce across the Carolinas, a little bit more numerous in the mountains of North Carolina and in the game lands, sandhills areas, but still, it's not one we often run wild indigo planted. But anyway, specific points, and these are hard. I swear, these are hard because I see these 2 and get confused. But anyway, the spotting on these, the number 2 area, number 2 there, let me see, or the one that you see all the spots are smaller. Okay, they're not the huge spots like a female horses and female juveniles. The spots are smaller. Okay, now on the Zirrucco and the wild indigo, number 1, there's usually not a dot, little white spot inside the wrist. Usually not. Number 2, wild indigo, male and female, tend to be darker on the inside of the wrist than on the outside. It's not real obvious on Jeff's photo here, but in some cases with the males, I think I have male coming up in another photo. I hope so. Anyway, they tend to be darker on the inside. Zirrucco, it's as dark on the outside of the wrist as on the inside. Zirrucco is larger. Wild indigo is smaller, maybe about 1.25 inches. They're bigger than a dreamer, but they're smaller than these other guys. And outside of that forewing, they tend to be a little bit more rounded. These are subtle things, and it's not always a given. Zirrucco tends to be a little bit longer winged and bigger, but these 2 are tricky. Okay, next one. Next slide. Okay. Now, wild indigo male. Now, this is a really nice photo of a male, a wild indigo. Again, you've seen that same horse. The wild indigo male is noticeably darker on the inner hat. See the forewing? Your eye is drawn the inner half of that forewing is much darker than the outer half. The outer part of the forewing of the wild indigo is that's number 3. The outer part is paler. Okay, so your eye is drawn to that. Both of them, or the wild indigo, excuse me, number 1 usually lacks that dot inside the wrist, and a horse usually has it. Wild indigo male, number 2, the wrist area is usually paler, okay, paler than the interior half of the wing. And horses, it's usually about the same. All right. So wild indigo, you don't run into them that often. They're smaller, but they can be seen together. Sometimes even in gardens. I know in Raleigh and Durham, if you have plantings of some baptisia, some wild indigo, that you get to the local colonies of wild indigo, dusky wing, and harshes around too. Okay, next one. Still some more dusky wings. Okay. Now, not many people have seen that one on the left, and I'll tell you one thing, they have gotten really rare now. I used to see more often, back in the 90s, early 2000s, and I don't see them much anymore. Jeff and I had seen them up at Hill Forest, north of Durham, a couple times, and I've seen them here and there. I've seen them about 8 or 10 times in North Carolina, but not much lately. But anyway, this is a jewel. This is a prize. And they're small. Mottled dusky wing is small. It's about 1.25 inches, maybe, wing spread. They're small. When they're flying around, you'll often notice they're a little small. It's mostly now just seen in the mountains and the foothills, but theoretically it can be seen into the Piedmont. They have 2 broods, like maybe April into May, and then again June, July. But anyway, April and May, probably the best time to see them, but they do have a second brood. But again, they are quite small. And here's the thing. Every year I see photographs on iNaturalist or people that send to me or to Jeff thinking, okay, is this because I've seen this out at River Road out there in Madison County. Is this a mottled dusky wing? Because the model has been there in the past. Used to be there. I'd seen them. And what they do is they end up sending a photo of a juveniles or a horse's, female. They're very blotchy, but look at the hind wing. The hind wing on the other 2 are kind of blurry. They're not blotchy. Mottled is very blotchy. Okay, even on the hind wing, very blotchy. The forewing is pale enough brown so that the black shows up better. Okay, and when they're fresh, if you kind of see almost like a little hint of lavender in that silvery gray on the forewing. I have seen some that they can show that very well indeed, like this one here. So mottled is quite rare. Probably most of you have never seen one. I haven't seen one in a while. I don't go out to where they used to be. And again, the only food plant is New Jersey tea. That shrub. So that limits things quite a bit. But it prefers dry wooded margins. I usually see them along a dirt road of a wooded edge, dry wooded edge. And usually it's not helping me to look for New Jersey tea first. Unless there's a lot of it, I don't normally see it. Okay. So anyway, that's the mottled dusky wing. Small and rare. Okay, next one. And this might be about the last one, or near one of the last ones in the dusky wing. This is just to show you the stray funereal dusky wing. Okay, this is more of a Texas and Arizona thing that does late summer and fall. Some do scatter and get to the Carolinas. A few photographs. I've seen 1 or 2 in North Carolina, and there's a couple photos, but they can be tricky. There's some dispute on a couple of photos, and you can see why. It's kind of a counterpart of the Zurako out in the west. Same size. They're both large, long. I wouldn't worry so much about the coloration of the forewings and all that, because the one on the left looks very fresh. A lot of dark brown, black kind of scaliness there. What you look for on the funereal is that very snowy white fringe on the hind wing. And as you can see, a lot of Siruccos can be pretty pale there, on the female anyway, but it's not white, okay? That's kind of buffy or sandy colored. So every now and then I'll see photographs that I don't think so. But anyway, there are a couple good photos in each state now to document funereal dusky wing. Okay, next. All right, and this is just kind of a summary here to show all the males together. I think I have one of all the females, and then we'll move on. Again, this is just, is there a way to pull that up a little bit? Kind of, oh, there, okay, there. Anyway, so you can see the bottom there. Anyway, the females here, I think the next one is males. And let me just check.
You want the males, Harry?
Yeah, I wanted the males. I'm sorry, the males first. I'm sorry. There we go. Okay. Yeah, the males first. Again, no arrows, which is just kind of the overall thing. The top first two, if you see a dusky wing with no white spotting, to dream you're sleepy. And then if it's got the white spots, then you've got more things to deal with. The juveniles on the upper right is the commonest one in the spring with all the silvering out there. And the horses on the bottom right is the most common one in the summer and the fall. Okay, now the females. And again, it's the same kind of next slide. There we go. Easy peasy. I'm joking there, of course. But you can see on the right the female juveniles and the female horses. They're blotchy, but if you send me a photo or Jeff a photo of those on the right, like that juvenile, say, is this a model dusky wing? Well, first of all, the hind wings aren't blotchy enough, and also look at the spots. Model dusky wing has small white spots, males and females. Okay, and so those large white spots on the forewing will rule that out also. So anyway, and I've gone over that. Okay, let's get to, I think, the next group. There we go. Everybody have this all set in stone? Now, here's the thing. I think cloudy wings are tougher than dusky wings.
Oh, great.
Say, well, how can that be? There's only 3 cloudy wings and there's 6 or so dusky wings, and the males and female dusky wings are different. Mostly the males and female dusky wings go by the book. You know, I mean, each individual is a little different, but if you know the field marks, we can normally figure them out. These 3 don't do that. There's so much variation on these 3 that sometimes, literally, it's impossible to be sure. And I've seen some, you go to our Sandhills Game Land, or you can South Carolina Sandhills, and some of these places where all 3 can be seen together on the same dirt road. No 2 are alike. No 2 Southerns, and they're all a little different. But anyway, I'll go into I have the arrows on the next page or 2, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, in general, you can see I have them in order of the most marked to the least marked. The northern on the right, and these aren't just males and females, but these are just 2 individuals of each. The northern is generally the least marked, more dots than bars. The southern is very marked, lots of parallel endings, squared off endings of the bars, and confused is in between. Okay, next one. I think I have some arrows to point out what we're to look for now. Once you see a cloudy wing, and you see all the cloudy wings, they're not blotchy, no black blotchiness. Okay, so you should be able to tell the difference between a cloudy wing and a dusky wing. I know get these photos on iNaturalist from people just photographing things, and sometimes they'll just get those mixed up. Anyway, okay, now southern cloudy wing, and have all 3 here together so it helps rather than on different pages. Okay, I don't like all that commenting thing going on because it's blocking the bottom of the screen here. Okay, southern cloudy wing, What you do, you look for, the first thing I often look for is that the costal margin of the wings, remember, is the front of the wings, the front part of the wing. So the costal, there's two sets of costal bars. There's the kind of basal one, the inner one, and the outer one. So I'm pointing to number one. If you look at that row, there's about 4 white squares there, 4 white marks. That's all run together. But on the southern, they're all aligned. That bottom one is aligned with the ones above it. Okay, and it's usually a square. It's usually not a little dot. It's more of a little square. Okay, they're all aligned. On the other two, it doesn't show really well on this confused, but the last bottom one, it tends to be a little to the outside. And on the northern, it's the same way. They're not in the line. So the number one on confused and northern, it's outward, it's a little bit on the outside. And so and they're more like dots. You know, it's not real squared off, you know, blocks there. The number two on there, most it can point to any of these. A lot of the southern cloudy wings markings are squared off at the bottom. They're either squares or rectangles or hourglass thing, but you can see there's a lot of blockiness to them. Okay. On confused cloudy wing, there's a lot of lines and the ends are kind of tapered or rounded and so forth. I wouldn't worry about how they're lined or anything like that. But anyway, confused is in the middle, and the northern, most of the four-wing pale marks you see are just spots or short bars with rounded ends. Some northerns are so fresh that they're almost no dots at all. Okay, so that's to take note on that. Okay, the next one slide. Okay, I think this is last. I just have 2 slides of these. This is the underside. Now I showed you the top. Now what you look for here on the bottom, because it's very helpful. Now, if you can see them this way, how you can tell northerns from the other two is northerns are very dark, not only on the wing, but the head is dark. Okay, sometimes these are hard to see from the top. You're looking down, but if you get a side view, the northern should have a dark chin, dark gray, and I'll see how dark that head is. And also note on the underside of this individual, you can clearly see that they're number 3, that little offset little spot there. Okay, so that photo is very easy to call as a northern cloudy wing. Going next one, confused. In the middle there, you can see on this individual that offset mark 2, number 3, okay? And number 1, confused cloudy wing has a paler face. Now this one doesn't have a real white chin, but it's pale, fairly pale. Some do have white. And confused, you can see it from the top, sometimes will have a white eye ring. The northern doesn't usually have any white on the head at all. No white eye ring. This is something you can see from the top. Southern cloudy wing has a white chin, can have a white eye ring too. But again, look at number 3. This is an easy call for a southern cloudy wing. See how block, even though that's a little bit misaligned, it's still touching most of that number. That bottom one is touching the one above it. So okay, see how it's almost in a straight line and it's a square. It's very blocky. The number 2, you don't usually need this mark, but southern cloudy wing does have white on the bend of the antenna there where I'm pointing. The others don't. That's occasionally you can see that in photos. I don't usually use that as a field mark in the field. Okay, next. Okay, now this is where it gets really dicey.
As if it hasn't already.
You get folks in South Carolina have to deal with this a lot more than we do in North Carolina. Males, everybody should be able to recognize what a checkered skipper looks like from the other guys. Okay, and whether it's a male or female, there's just so much white on them. small whitish skipper with a lot of black and gray and all that sort of thing. The common checkered and the white checkered. Again, the common checkered, I should mention on the cloudy wings, they all have two broods, okay? Two broods. These guys, the common checkered skipper on the left is the main one in North Carolina. It used to be the main one in South Carolina, but now the white checkered has moved in from the south, and it's overtaken it only by dissecting. No, too gory here, but the only way to be sure is to dissect a male, and look at the genitalia. So that's kind of like, forget about that. But it has to be done to be sure. Anyway, take photos. They're going to look about the same. So what I look for in checkered skippers, there's two areas to check. Number one, you see that big white area just inside of where I'm pointing on number one. Is that big block rectangle? Sometimes it can look like an anvil. If you look on the tropical there, that large, the cell area, the cell part of the wing, that large white area, just to the outside where I'm pointing on number one on white and common, it's usually just a tiny little dot there. Tiny little dot or nothing at all. Okay. Now on the tropical, which is fairly rare, it's not so rare in parts of coastal South Carolina. It's rare in North Carolina. It's getting a little bit more numerous as well. All three of these can be in grassy areas. They can be on lawns and gardens and so forth like that. The tropical is getting more numerous, but it's still the least numerous of the three. On the tropical, you see number two, that there's usually quite a sizable oval or elliptical white spot there. That's the first thing I'll look for. Don't worry about the amount of blue and the hairiness on the inside. The tropicals can be a little bit whiter or more hairs there. But usually one thing I'll look for is that mark number one, right outside of that anvil area. And two, and I didn't, this was an oversight in the book, and I wish I'd mentioned that at the time. Look at the outside of the forewing. On common and white checkered, see all the checkering out there, the black and white. They're about equal in the amount of white and black. And some of them are more white, okay, that number two, and the outer fringe there. On tropical, toward the tip of the wing there, it's a lot more black. You see how it starts about 50-50, and as you go up toward the tip of the wing at number two on the right, it's mostly black, okay? And that shows pretty well. That's a really good character, and some of the photos we have for North Carolina, that's one thing that really stands out. Because otherwise, first glance, they look about the same. I don't know. Okay, next slide.
Just a second, Harry.
Okie dokie.
Okay, there we go. I was trying to see if I could do some annotation for you, but never mind.
Okay, yeah, the females here. This is the last of the skippers I'm going to talk about. I could do another one later on in the summer on marsh skippers and wetland skippers and all that stuff. But anyway, in the spring, some of these checkered skippers can start flying in March and April. That's why I wanted to bring these to your attention here. Females are browner and much less white than the males. At first glance, they all look like the same old thing here. How do you tell them apart? Again, white and common, you really can't. There's just no way to separate these. And Jeff Glassberg, the master of all these studying photos, he's thrown up his hands too. Says, no, I just can't do it. Although the white checkered probably is in more sandy and hotter places because it's more southerly and more desert oriented than on the common checkered. But anyway, they're very similar. Look at number one, outside that wrist area, that cell area, there's nothing, almost nothing. And on the tropical, you see that more of an elliptical white spot. And the forewing tip, see all that dark out there at number two. Whereas on the common checkered and the white, it's 50-50. Okay. So even though it may look first glance like that tropical, so, oh, I don't know what it is. If you look closely, it's got those two distinctive marks. Okay. So again, and these guys are easy to photograph because they can be underfoot and they're out in lawn areas. Okay. Next, we're going to some butterflies now. And okay, now pearly eyes. They'll be flying in the spring. So there's three species of pearly eyes. The southern and they have two broods each. The southern and the Creole, the left and the right one, they can be found together in the same places, and they feed on the caterpillars are only on cane. Okay, so they like wet woods, and often they're inside the forest. But a lot of times, you find them on a dirt road that goes through a forest, something like that. They can be on the ground. But these are large butterflies, big brown jobs of the forest. The northern is more of a mountains and Piedmont thing. A few places in North Carolina where you can see all three theoretically in the same place as time, although it's very hard to do. Okay, so now what do you do? Where do you look first? Well, there's a couple things. You got a good look at the antenna, the club. Mm-hmm. You see on these, you can see these. The southern is the only one with an all orange club. There's no black there. Okay. The other two clubs are dark with a little yellow or orange tip. So if the club, you see it in the binoculars or photograph, it's dark with a pale tip, or even if you don't see the tip, if it's dark, you've ruled out southern. Okay. Two, okay, the forewing, look at the eye spots. On southern, they tend to be curved. Okay, it's a curved line of about 4. In the northern, generally with 4 more in a straight line. It's not real fallible. The Creole normally has 5. Okay, and a lot of times that 5th one, the bottom one, is covered up by the hind wing. Sometimes that forewing is tucked in there. You can't be sure. But if it has 5 obvious eye spots there on that forewing, it should be a Creole. The third thing you look at, or one of the things, is that dark line on the middle of the forewing there. On Creole, it's knuckled. You see it's kind of bent outward like knuckles. If you hold your hand so you see knuckles, you look like knuckles there. And on the northern and southern, it tends to be straighter. There might be a little bit of that, but it's not really obvious. Okay, it's more of a straight line.
Wow.
And on the male Creole, not the female, but on the male, you see how tall the forewing is. Tall and skinny. A lot of times just by shape alone. When I see a pearly eye up the road and I'm looking at the binoculars and it looks real tall like that, it's like, oh, that's a Creole. So anyway, there are these several things you look at there. Okay, I got another slide or two on pearly eyes. Okay, the next one. Okay, this is another looking more at the hind wing now. Okay, and I don't usually deal with the hind wing that much. Okay, I don't usually deal with the hind wing that much. But first of all, on the Creole, note that the female on the right there. This is the female Creole. It's got the 5 spots there. It's not very rounded, so you can't use shape to call that a Creole just by that wing shape. So you see the knuckling here. You see the knuckling there. On the Creole, each hindwing eye spot is separately encircled with white. That may be hard to see unless you get good photographs. On the other two, it tends to be that white kind of encloses all of them. Okay. And now, good mark. This is one that Jeff discovered a couple years ago that Glassberg missed. He doesn't miss many, Glassberg, in his books, but he found out sometimes where you can't see the antennal club. It's not well lit up. And let's say you cover up the club and you get one of these 2 photos on the left. Then what do you do? Because they look pretty similar. Well, on northern, every photo we've seen, that little eye spot, that white in the middle there, is a white dot. On some photographs, on most of them, a few of those white areas are literally bars. Okay, they're not all just little dots. Sometimes if you can zoom in on a photo, enlarge it, you can see that, because there are a lot of times on these photos or in the field, and this is more for photos, a lot of times you can't see the antenna club very well because it's against a background that just doesn't let you. So there's always some subtle ways to try to identify them, separate them. Okay, next one. Next slide. Okay, satyrs. Okay, this is tricky. I don't know, if Tom is on watching, Tom Austin, he's the expert on these guys. Now, he didn't describe these, but the intricate satyr was described as science around 2012 to 2014, somewhere in there. And some people still don't buy it. Jeff Lesper doesn't, but he's taxonomically challenged, I'll call him. He doesn't like anything new. Once things were described as of 1990, when his first books came out, you can't be describing new species. So anyway, we've all seen Carolina satyrs. They're widespread, several broods. Most of these two have several broods. They start coming out in March, at least the Carolinas are very widespread. So what you look for on the Carolina satyr, and a lot of these you have to let go. But anyway, you want to see these from below and think that this is the way they normally perch. Okay. Carolina satyr, that on the hind wing, that post median line, that line closest there to the inside of the spot row, the eye spots, is usually bent inward. Okay, where that top dark spot, eye spot is, the large top eye spot. And you can see that. That's why I put two photos of Carolina and two of intricate. And on the lower one, it's even more pronounced. Okay, that hind wing on that line, you have to look carefully and get good photos. You can see these in the field on some. Some can be tricky, but there's always an indentation toward the front. It's almost like around that top eye spot. Okay, so that's usually, and also on the second one there, number 3, the line makes sure a rearward bend just in front of the next one down. So it's a little weight. The line is wavier there. On good intricate satyr photos, that line is almost straight from the top, that costal area, at least halfway down the wing. Okay, now on the top photo, you can see it kind of halfway down, it's straight, then it'll bend. On the bottom photo, it's more straight with a slight arc all the way down. So there's always going to be some variation. Some photos you just have to leave them alone. But that's probably that's about the best way to identify these. Intricate satyr seemingly is a lot scarcer. It's more finicky on its habitat. It likes richer, more diverse, moist forests. Both of these are more forest interior, but they can be on the outside, on the edge, bouncing around. Satyrs fly, they kind of bounce around and like have to follow, like land, this land, just stop, land. So, and finally they land. The intricate satyr is a little bit tamer. Okay, they're a little bit easier to follow and put down. They're not as kind of free flying as much as Carolina. So intricate satyr is a little bit easier to photograph, but it's a scarce. So we're still trying to figure out the range. It's mostly coastal plain. Carolina is across both states. Okay, but they are very tricky. But anyway, it can be done. Okay, now in the remaining time, I think next slide. I think I got the top. Then we'll get to some fun ones, fun group. Now, if the wings are spread, remember most satyrs don't spread their wings, or pearly owls don't, but the Carolina satyr does and intricate do spread the wings. Now on a male, this is tricky, but you can see the slender abdomen here. On male Carolinas, it's darker on the inside of the forewing, as in this photo. This can be very tricky. A lot of times, it's just all brown because it'd be a female. On the intricate stator, males and females are just solid brown there. Female is similar. Female Carolina supposedly looks like the one on the right there. So this only works in male. So if you have a satyr that's spread the wing open and it's all brown, you won't be able to tell. Okay. If it's darker, almost blackish brown on the inside, it'll be a Carolina. That's when the intricate was described by some other folks, that was one of the keys there about the scale patterning. Okay. The hind wing line pattern can always be a little dicey. One thing that's usually pretty definitive is certain things about the scale patterns, and these sex things scaling on the males there. Okay, in the remaining time, we're going to have some fun with the next group. Now, I had to pick a few more. Next one, there we go. Now, most of this is more like May and June. Okay, so it's not quite, these aren't really springtime things, but this is the last group I will cover here, and it's the hair streaks, the Satyrium group. These are fun. Most of us love the Satyriums and the Elfins. I could have picked some Elfins. Probably should have done a slide or two on the Elfins because they are spring flyers. But the hair streaks, there are quite a few species, and they're very confusing. As we found out last year on the CBS trip to the Sandhills, North Carolina, last June 1st and 2nd, we had some hair streaks at Weymouth Woods we weren't sure about. Like, there's some experts here, and we still couldn't figure them out. So, like, I'm telling you, they don't always go by the book. But anyway, here we go. Banded hair streak is the most widespread hair streak of this group in the Carolinas. Theoretically, it can be in most counties. It's more numerous in the mountains. But, you can go, and all these are flying like May and June. Hickory is very rare, and it's just North Carolina mountains. I just threw this in, and I like to see hickory unless it's high mountains in South Carolina. Now, these two do not have, if you look at the tail area, you'll see a couple red marks, and then the blue, large blue area. That's what we focus on. On banded, that blue never has a red on top of that, not up the wing, but toward the inside of the wing. There's no crown on that blue. Okay, so that's one thing you look for in a hair streak. These hair streaks, does that blue mark have red crown? Does it have a red on top? These don't. Okay, bandeds, you can see all these little marks in here. Some bandeds only have the inner part of each of those paired. All these things have paired bars. You see these sets of parallel white marks, these paired bars. Sometimes on bandeds, only the inner half is just worn away or is not much there. So those are a little easier. The top one, for example. The bottom one with all the arrows on it is a little trickier. I probably don't need to go into all the details, but on hickory hair streak, for the most part, the bars tend to be a little farther away, a little bit more untidy. And if you look at the middle of the hind wing, you see a couple of those bars are stacked right almost on top of each other, one above the other. And on bandage, number 4, it's not the way. The top one there is not directly over the middle one. So these are very tricky. Not like I've only seen hickory is the one resident butterfly in North Carolina I still haven't seen here. I've seen them in New Jersey and New York, but I still haven't seen it in North Carolina. It's some of the mountain folks have seen one or two, but it's a lifetime event. Trust me, it's very rare. So anyway, but they're flying in June. Hickory more like in June or early July. Anyway, okay. The next slide. I've got a bunch more. Okay, now kings versus banded. The king's hair streak is less common than the banded in general. And king's is a coastal plain for the most part. Its only host plant is sweetleaf simplocos, that small tree, kind of semi-evergreen. It has those neat ball of flowers in the spring without petals. But they only use, the caterpillars only eat sweetleaf. So you won't see kings away from sweetleaf. Now, both of these can be found together. We've seen them together. I've seen them together a few times. The kings, again, always look at the blue area first. If it's got a red crown, it shouldn't be a banded. It won't be a banded. Okay? The top on two on the right, there's no red there. No red crown on that. On the kings, they have that red on the crown. Red there. Otherwise, they're pretty similar. And don't worry about the ground color. You see brown and gray. Trust me, that doesn't matter. I don't know if it's a sexual thing or what. Some of these things are gray and some are brown, and I don't know what that means. But I've seen kings brown and bandeds gray. So forget that. Don't go by the main color there. But again, kings. Otherwise, the banding pattern on the kings, see all those pair bars, can look very similar to a banded, other than that crown there, the obvious red cap on there, that number one. Let's like say number three. Otherwise, they're pretty similar. But kings is more restricted, more in the coastal plain, although it can be in the foothills and so forth. Okay, next one. A few more to go. Bandeds versus Edwards. Edwards is very localized. And if you've seen Edwards, you've probably seen them in the Sandhills region. Even though it's a more northern thing, there's a few in the mountains. Mostly to see an Edwards, you go to the Sandhills areas. Weymouth Woods in North Carolina, Sandhills Game Land, or probably in the Carolina Sandhills Refuge, or in that area in the central part of the state. It's pretty rare in South Carolina, more so. It's still rare in North Carolina, but in some places you can see a lot. Again, both of these are on oaks. The oaks plant bandeds are a wide range of oaks. Edwards likes blackjack oak, scrub oaks. What you look for, again, first of all, look at the blue. Edwards usually does not have a blue crown or cap on it, okay? So that alone is usually not good enough. Now, number two, most Edwardses have darker black marks. The areas inside those little paired areas tend to be black and stand out more, and they are more circled. That white area is more like parentheses, or in some cases completely surrounds it. So the bottom photo, you can see how those black marks all up and down the hind wing and the forewing tend to be encircled by the white. Okay, and on banded, again, bandeds are just kind of parallel sided bars there. So the Edwards is a real fresh Edwards is real pretty. And the one thing that makes them very pretty is that number three. Sometimes that angle there, that lower part of the toward the end of the tail there, below the tail, can be bright red. A big wide red area. Banded may show a little bit of that, but not much. So again, Edwards from banded is usually not too tricky. Because especially with the more encircling white around those areas, the black, dark areas there. Okay, next one, a couple more to go, but still hair streaks. Okay, now here are the two of them that have the red crown. Both of these are tough. And striped hair streak, oh boy, that's a matter of luck. I haven't seen one in a while. I've seen a lot over the years, but I just don't get out as much lately. You have to stumble on that. The host plants are varied. I think mostly hibiscus blueberries. Most of the ones I've seen, usually there's a lot of blueberries genus Vaccinium. Sometimes the sparkleberry, the evergreen one, that little small tree is a host plant for the striped hair streak. But anyway, often you just kind of stumble onto it. It's rare statewide. A lot of times in a given year, there's only 2 or 3 records for the whole state. So anyway, and same with South Carolina. You just have to stumble on that and get out a lot in May and June. First of all, you look at the blue again. You see if it's got red, then what? Stripe is usually pretty obvious. You can see how far apart those paired bands are. So usually, once you see a stripe, it's usually, bam, you got something good. And it's a red letter day or week or a month or a year. You see one of these guys. A couple of years is about all, not per person. I'm talking for the whole state. So anyway, striped, you can see the paired bars are quite far apart. And on kings, they are distinctly paired, and they have that red cap. So anyway, that's that one. Okay, next one. Okay, so that means we're about done. So what happens if you're confused? That's John Travolta, of course, and Welcome Back, Kotter. I'm so confused, Mr. Kotter. Okay, next slide. What do? Yeah. Just buy the book. There you go. So anyway, that's the cover. Now, one thing about the cover, I don't like the cover. I'll give it a minute here. We were asked about the cover by UNC Press to design, pick a butterfly for the cover. And so we wanted one that was first colorful, but also what's distinctive about this region, the Carolinas, Virginia, and Georgia. Okay. And the Diana fritillary is primarily in those states, Tennessee, Kentucky, in the Southern Appalachians, and also in the Ozarks. Okay. So this is a distinctive butterfly for the region. So we picked a male, which makes sense. But, in hindsight, wish I'd picked a female. The reason? We were not told about those other 2 butterflies. Some artsy-fartsy editor, photo editor, cover editor, and I use that seriously, decided to pick a couple. And, of course, what did she do? She picked another fritillary. Gulf fritillary, don't get me wrong, is a beautiful butterfly, the one on the right. But you see, it's orange. And they're both fritillaries. There's 185 species in the Carolinas. And of course, they put the Baltimore checker spot, which is a lovely one, underneath to have that cut over there. So that top half, I don't like at all. It's gotten some criticisms. It's like it's too orange. So had I chosen, you see John Demko behind him, he's got a female, Diana fritillary. I would much rather, knowing that, have chosen a female Diana fritillary, but too late now. Anyway, the content is just fine. I just didn't like the cover.
Second edition.
And then one more slide. There we go. All right, so that's it. Ran a little over, but whatever. Like I say, I could probably do another one of these, in the summer to some of these wetland. There's a ton of wetland skippers and so forth, these rare skippers and berries and dions and all these kind of things that are driving people crazy. But anyway, that's that.
Harry, why didn't you do the comparison between the Edwards and the King hair streak?
That's a good question, because that was the one we had trouble with. By the way, there you see there's the female Diana fritillary behind John there. That would have been nice for the cover to get some blue on there, but we didn't know. But that's a good question, because that's the pair. You say, how can you confuse King's hair streak with Edwards? King's has a red cap. Edwards doesn't. Well, I know that Rob Gilson was a leader, and I was there. A bunch of folks, I know Marty and David, were you there, John? I don't know, but a bunch of folks were there.
Yeah,
and we struggled some at Weymouth we had them both at Weymouth, but then we had one little section where we had 3 or 4 there at the main park, and we ended up calling them a day later after we looked at photos. I know Rob was the one, and since he was the lead, he put his foot down and said, yes, they are this one. I don't remember which it was. We did get a lot of, my phone here, sorry. Take it off, it never ended. So anyway, we did get over to the Paint Hill section where there are, about a mile away, there are more Edwards. So we had some good Edwardses there. We had 1 or 2 Edwardses at the main unit, but that's a good question. And if I put photos side by side, that wouldn't help. What we would have needed to do is put those photos of those mystery ones, the one that gave us trouble, John. That's what we should have done, because there were 3 or 4 that were there. We had a little group there, and we were just stumbling on them. And like, I don't remember what we decided. We ended up calling one or the other. But yeah, we shouldn't have that. We shouldn't have that problem, but we did. So some of these hair streaks are tricky. Okay.
We had that problem in Aiken County between Edwards and King.
Yep.
And some people went for Edwards, but where they found the butterfly, the host plant for the King was there. So I would go with King because of the host plant.
Right. Now, yeah. Normally, of course, the Simplocos can be in dry places. It's normally along wet areas or more moist areas, and the host plant for the Edwards are like scrub oaks, blackjack and so forth. So in a way, a little bit the habitats are a little bit. That looks like an Edwards there.
This is from Weymouth Woods.
Okay.
And we did.
That looked like a good. That's a good Edwards there. That may have been the first one. I remember we had a couple. We had one up in the tree that Chris Talkington found. Oh wait, go back to that other one you just had, the middle one. That one. You see that's one. Look at that one. You see, there's a sort of a red cap crown there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, but look at the spot pattern. There's the spot patterning is more like an Edwards. So
I think we called that one.
I would call that an Edwards. I would probably call that an Edwards. There's something about the V at the lower 2 things there. There's a V there of those 2 white bars that I don't know if that makes a difference or not. I think King's is more that, but that's one that gave us fits.
Yep.
Like I say,
That one we said was Edwards. This one we said was King's.
Yeah, that one is King. That one's a good King's because those paired bars are not rounded. So go back to that third one there. That the one that one. Okay, stop at that. No, the other one. That one. Okay, look at that. Okay, that one looks like a good Edwards. That's a good Edwards there. It's got a lot of red on the anal area, and the white. The dark areas are almost encircled, those white marks. So that looks like a good Edwards. There's that one that's very controversial.
Yep. And that's the one right there.
That's that one.
Let's see what we did the others here.
That one, that's another tricky one. That's got a lot of, that looks more like a King's.
Right.
I would call that a King's. That's got a lot of red on the blue. And it's, there's a little bit of those bars on the hind wing are not quite straight, but that leans more to King's to me.
And that's what I think that's what I called it afterwards.
Yeah. So, and ditto King's on that one. If that's a different one there,
yeah,
that looks like a pretty easy King's, and that's probably a King's, I guess.
Yeah.
But there, the first one, there's a few that are obviously Edwards like that one. The first one you had was the classic. That's a classic one. That's a classic Edwards there. You see, no red at all on the blue, and very black and encircled. That's easy. If they were all like that, they wouldn't be the problem in the first place.
But they weren't, Harry. They weren't.
I know that's the thing, but thank goodness we had about 15 hair streaks there, and thank goodness we had 5 or 6 unequivocal ones one of each, and then about 4 or 5 that were like, oh boy. So, and then the next day, remember when we were in the Sandhills game land out there in that field, that overgrown field, and then looking for dotted skipper, which we did find. We had 2 bandits. We didn't have any bandits that first day in Weymouth. We had the Kings and the Edwards. So we did manage 3 hair streaks for the 2 days. I have seen stripe there, but that's very rare. So anyway, okay.
I think one of the take-home messages is, and first, great job, Harry. Thank you for doing this. One of the take-home messages is you cannot always put a positive idea on every single individual, and you have to be okay with that. As difficult as it is for some of us to be okay with that, I think that's one of the bottom lines. Some of these you just have to say it's a hair streak spa or a clouded / orange sulfur or king / Edward. So it's just one of those things you got to learn to be okay with and find your.
Sometimes though, Jeff, it can be very tricky. Like when you're in the mountains. If you're in the mountains and you're in the mountains and you've never seen a hickory, and you may never see one again, and you have one that's borderline with a bandit, that's where it's really tricky to say, I can't tell. I can't be sure, but I want it to be a hickory. I want it to be a hickory. At least when we were in the Sandhills, we had other chances. We weren't sure on every one, but at least we know we had good ones of both. It's that tricky one, like I say, when it's a rare one, and that may be your only shot at it, and you're not sure.
And this was the next day, Harry, at the Sandhills.
Okay, so that's a bandit.
That's the bandit.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you brought that out, because we were looking for dotted skipper, and that was and thankfully we had 2 of them. I was like, whew, because there were very few thistles out there where we went. That was the target. I said, well, I've seen it here before, and that's probably the other one. We had 2 different individuals of bandit.
Yep.
I don't usually see bandits out there, but so anyway, were those all from that trip?
Yes.
Yeah,
there's the
okay. Yeah, that's one of the dotteds. We had 2 different ones there. That may be a male. You can see the rust orangey on the forewing. I think we had a female. But anyway, we had 2 individuals. Anyway, and I said we got to look. I don't know what that other thing is. Somebody knows. But anyway, there were very few thistles. I knew these things. We're going to see a skipper, of course, gray hair streak. If we're going to see a skipper, I think it's a Warren Zirocco, if you want my opinion.
I thought maybe that was the test.
Look, that's good. No, look. No, seriously, look at that. Okay, look at this guy here. It does have a white spot there on the inside of that wrist, but that wrist is very pale. That wrist is very pale. And also look inside there. You see, even though it's worn, see how lack of blotchiness that is? You don't show that black blotching in there. So I think that's a Warren Zirocco. I would call that a Warren Zirocco without too much hesitation.
I think we call it a Horace's, so I'll change the name.
Anyway, okay, so we shouldn't have taken the,
No, that's no problem. That's what I call. I think that's what Marty and I identified it as.
Well, anyway. Oh yeah, there's our only. That was our Meskies. We got lucky with that one too, because we were. I know Dave and Marty and I. We were a good. I don't say a tenth of a mile away. We were hundreds of yards away on the other side of the road, and the other folks had robbing them had this Meskies. This tied the early record. June the 2nd ties the early record. And so we were very lucky to see one that early, and it was 65 or 70 degrees. That butterfly was cold. I mean, we weren't cold, but it was cold, and it stayed put for, I swear, 10 minutes. And so we were all able to see it. So we got lucky with those. Anyway. So these were all from that trip.
Yes.
Okay. Southern Skipperling. I don't think most of us saw that one. A couple of you obviously did.
Pretty.
Yep. No doubt about what that little guy is.
Thank you so much, Harry.
Yes.
All righty.
I really appreciate it.
Anybody have any other questions?
What we need is a seminar on spring and summer azure sometime.
Oh boy, yeah. I hate leading field trips to the mountains. Every now and then when you get if you're by yourself or if I'm just with Jeff in the mountains, we can call something an Appalachian or this or that, or in the coastal plain of Holly or this or that. Not okay. If we're wrong, okay, who's gonna? But then when you're leading a group of people who might be a lifer or something, then it matters. And then it's like, oh gosh, because we do this and like, oh, is that an Appalachian tiger or an Eastern tiger? Is that is it with that crescent or that crescent? Which crescent, which azure? And we got, like, but that is a good, the thing about that, John, is you put photographs of the undersides of azures on the screen, you're out of context. You have to know how big it is, what the habitat was. A lot of these azure photographs that we see all the time sent to us are on iNaturalist. You say, I don't know what the habitat, and I don't know the size or anything like that. You just say, well, so
here's your spring summer azure seminar. Get a mail, collect it, or get amazing photos of the upper side and send it to Harry Pavulon in Virginia.
it helps to have two different sizes,
That's
like
what
an Appalachian,
Dennis told me to do.
like Appalachian azure. It looks identical to a summer azure, but unless you have size, unless it's with something for a size comparison, you can't. You just don't know.
Saturated.
Yeah. Okay.
We done?
Yep. I guess so.
Well,
I'm
thank
fine.
you so much
Thank
again.
Thanks
Harry.
again, Harry. Appreciate
Did a
it.
great job.
Appreciate it. Good job.
Good job. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.